Elisa Monroe had always thought her body was trying to tell her something. She just didn't know what. It started as a dull ache low in her pelvis, the kind of pain a doctor might dismiss as stress or just hormones. But this wasn't just stress. It gnawed at her day and night, sharp as broken glass one moment, then fading into a sickening throb that made her legs weak. Some days, she couldn't even sit down without wincing. At 23, she was used to discomfort. She grew up bouncing between foster homes, shelters, and finally a religious group home in rural Georgia where pain, physical, emotional, spiritual, was a constant companion. But this was different. This was inside her, deep. After 2 months of hiding it, she finally made an appointment at a free clinic in Savannah. It wasn't the most comfortable place, bright fluorescent lights, peeling linoleum floors, nurses with tired eyes, but at least it was private. The doctor on call that day, Dr. Laura Kessler, had seen her fair share of unusual cases. She took Elisa's vitals, asked the usual questions, then helped her onto the exam table. "I need to do a pelvic exam," she said gently, snapping on her gloves. Elisa nodded, eyes fixed on the ceiling. She hated this part. Every time a stranger touched her like this, something inside her recoiled. Not just fear, but something deeper, like a warning. Halfway through the exam, Dr. Kessler paused. Her brow furrowed. Elisa stiffened. "What is it?" "I'm feeling something," the doctor said carefully. "A hard object. Maybe a cyst. Or, I don't know. Just hold still." Seconds later, Elisa felt a strange tug, followed by a sharp jolt of pain. "I'm going to remove it," Dr. Kessler said. "Stay with me." There was a metallic clink. Then another. Then another. By the time Dr. Kessler had finished, there were 5 small, bloody objects sitting in a kidney dish beside the table. They looked like jagged stones, yellowed, irregular. But they weren't stones. They were teeth. Human teeth. Dr. Kessler stared at them, her expression blank. This can't be right." Elisa sat up, her gown falling slightly off her shoulder. She looked at the dish. Her stomach turned. "What is that?" she whispered. The doctor didn't answer immediately. Instead, she left the room, returning moments later with 2 other staff members. They all stared in silence at the dish, whispering. Eventually, a nurse turned to Elisa and asked quietly, "Have you had any surgeries in the past? Any trauma you can remember?" Elisa blinked. Her mouth was dry. "No. Nothing like this. I don't understand." They told her it might be a teratoma, a type of tumor that can grow teeth, hair, even bones. It was rare, but not unheard of. Still, the doctor didn't look convinced. Neither did Elisa. She was sent home that day with painkillers and instructions to rest while the lab ran further analysis. But no amount of medication could quiet her thoughts. How do 5 human teeth end up inside a woman who never had surgery, never gave birth, never even remembered being seriously ill? And why, when she closed her eyes that night, did she keep seeing a candlelit room and men's voices chanting in a language she didn't understand? Over the next week, the pain subsided, but the questions didn't. She tried to focus on school, on her part-time job at the diner, on her art therapy classes. But everything felt different, like the walls around her brain were crumbling, like something she'd spent years suppressing was clawing its way back to the surface. Then the clinic called. "Elisa," the woman on the other end said, voice tight, "You need to come in. Today." She showed up within the hour, sweat beading at her temples, hands shaking. The nurse led her into a back room. Dr. Kessler was already there, holding a manila folder and wearing the kind of expression you don't forget, somewhere between horror and disbelief. "We ran the DNA analysis," she said. Elisa sat down slowly. "And the teeth. They're human, yes, but not from the same person." Elisa stared. In fact, The doctor continued. Each one belonged to a different male individual. 5 men, all unrelated, all deceased. There was a silence so thick it felt like drowning. How is that even possible? Elisa whispered. Dr. Kessler didn't answer, because she didn't know either. Dr. Laura Kessler had been practicing obstetrics and gynecology for over 17 years. She had seen uterine cysts as big as grapefruit, cases of forgotten tampons turned toxic, even a woman who unknowingly carried a mummified fetus for 3 decades. But nothing prepared her for the teeth. 5 human molars, each in different states of wear. Some were cracked. One had a gold filling. Another had deep decay. What chilled her wasn't the presence of the teeth alone, but the distinct variation between them, clear signs they hadn't come from a single mouth. And now the DNA report confirmed it. They don't belong to Elisa, she had told the lab technician. No, and they don't belong to each other either. All 5 teeth carried distinct male DNA profiles, for were matched to open missing persons cases. One was linked to a homicide, unsolved. Each man had disappeared within a 3-year radius, all within 150 miles of Savannah, Georgia. And somehow, a part of each of them was inside a 23-year-old woman who had never met them, never seen their faces, never remembered anything. Back in the clinic, Elisa sat with her hands folded so tightly her knuckles turned white. The sterile exam room felt more like an interrogation cell. Dr. Kessler slid a printed chart across the desk. These are the names, she said. We aren't supposed to release them, but I think you deserve to know. Elisa scanned the list. Christopher Maynard, 34. Disappeared on his way to a job interview in Macon, Georgia. David Hernandez, 28. Last seen leaving a bar in Jacksonville. Tyrone Blake, 41. A fisherman reported missing after a storm. Joel Fitz, 25. An amateur preacher who went off the grid. Unknown male. DNA matched a torso found in a river last spring. No head, no dental records. Until now. I've never heard of any of these people, Elisa whispered. Are you sure? Kessler asked gently. Could any of them have hurt you? Maybe something from the past. Elisa's throat tightened. Her heart raced. The past. That was the problem. So much it was missing. It was like a black curtain drawn across the first 15 years of her life. I don't remember, she said. The police were called in that afternoon. Not a full SWAT team. Not yet. But Detective Valerie Watts from the Chatham County Violent Crimes Unit walked into the clinic with a badge on her hip and steel in her eyes. She didn't sit, just stood at the edge of the room and looked at Elisa the way someone might look at a ticking suitcase in an airport. Mind telling me how 5 men's teeth ended up inside your body, Miss Monroe? I don't know, Elisa said. That's not an answer. Elisa looked down. It's the only one I have. Dr. Kessler intervened, reminding the detective that Elisa wasn't a suspect, at least not yet. Valerie reluctantly backed off, but not before leaving her card. We'll be in touch. They would be, in ways Elisa couldn't imagine. That night, Elisa didn't sleep. She barely moved. She sat in her dark apartment, 1 bedroom, leaky pipes, a broken ceiling fan, staring at the wall. Something was wrong. More than just the teeth. More than the names. She couldn't explain it, but her body felt haunted. She turned off the light. The hum of the fridge filled the silence. Then a sound. Whispers. Distant but real. Male voices. Chanting. Low and rhythmic, like a hymn sung backward. She jumped from the couch, turned the lights on, grabbed the pepper spray from her purse. No one was there. She wasn't dreaming. She wasn't crazy. But something inside her was waking up. The next morning, she opened her laptop and began searching each man's name. She stared at the faces, missing posters, crime scene photos, news clips. Nothing sparked recognition. But one name, Joel Fitz, fell off. He was younger than the others, wore a white suit and tie, and preached healing through surrender in YouTube clips that had fewer than 300 views. One video stood out. A dimly lit church basement, candles flickering, women kneeling in a circle, men in white robes walking in silence. It was private, unlisted, but someone had saved it. At minute 2:14, the camera tilted, capturing the face of a girl in the corner. The resolution was grainy, but Elisa felt her own blood freeze. It was her. She couldn't breathe. Why was she there? Who was filming? Why didn't she remember? Her hands trembled as she replayed the clip. The girl, she, sat cross-legged on the concrete floor. Her eyes were vacant, her mouth slightly open. Someone touched her shoulder. The screen went dark. She closed the laptop, slammed it shut. Her head spun. Something had happened. Something monstrous. Something ritualistic. She pulled out her old journal, a spiral-bound notebook she used for therapy. Skimming the pages, she stopped at one she'd written 6 months ago, an entry she barely remembered writing. There's something inside me. Not a baby, not a tumor. Something left over. 2 days later, Detective Valerie Watts knocked on her door. I need you to come with me. To where? We found something, Valerie said. Under the church. The church sat at the end of a cracked rural road in Pierce County, Georgia. From the outside, Faith River Revival Center looked abandoned. Its white paint peeled like old skin, and weeds curled up through the broken wooden steps. A faded sign swung in the wind. Come as you are, leave redeemed. But what lay beneath it was far from redemption. Elisa stood in front of the building, arms crossed tightly over her chest, heart pounding so hard it drowned out the cicadas. Detective Valerie Watts nodded to the 2 officers beside her. Open it. They pried the side door open. It groaned like something waking from a long sleep. Elisa hesitated on the threshold. I was here, she said softly, staring into the dark. Valerie looked at her. You remember now? Elisa's eyes were distant. Flashes. Faces. A hymn with no words. Inside, the air was thick, stagnant, damp, laced with mildew and something metallic underneath. Blood. The sanctuary was empty. Just a dusty pulpit and rows of broken pews. But Valerie wasn't here for the upstairs. She led Elisa to the back hallway, toward a crooked staircase that spiraled downward. Each step creaked, protesting their weight. The air grew colder. At the bottom, a heavy metal door stood slightly ajar, its frame scarred by what looked like scratch marks. What the hell? One officer muttered. Valerie pushed it open with the back of her hand. And there it was, a basement lined with stone walls and old wooden beams. No electricity, just shafts of sunlight filtering through cracks in the foundation. And at the center of the room, a ring of melted wax and human hair, encircling a rusted iron chair bolted to the floor. Elisa stepped forward slowly, like her feet remembered where to go even for mine didn't. I sat there, she said, pointing to the chair. I think I was drugged. Along the walls were crude chalk symbols, half erased, water-stained, but still visible. Crosses inside circles. Eyes with no pupils. One symbol was drawn in what lab analysis would later confirm to be human blood. Detective Watts turned to the forensic team. Document everything. In a corner of the room sat a wooden crate, sealed with rusted nails. Inside, they found dozens of small items. Melted candles, torn undergarments, lengths of rope, and worst of all, a leather pouch filled with human teeth. Some matched the men in Elisa's case. So didn't. You were part of this, Valerie said later, voice low measured. But I don't think you were willing. They showed Elisa the pouch. She gagged. Oh my God. Valerie knelt beside her. What did they do to you down here, Elisa? She shook her head. I don't know. I remember singing. I remember being cold. I remember someone telling me I was chosen. For what? Her voice was barely audible. To receive them. That night, Elisa's dreams were worse than usual. She saw fire. She saw 5 men kneeling before the chair, hands bound, blindfolded. She saw herself sitting naked on the floor, covered in oil and chanting words she didn't understand. Then a flash, a hand holding pliers, the sound of teeth cracking, then blackness. The next morning, Valerie visited her at the safe house. "There's more," she said. They had pulled old case files from the 1990s, back when Faith River was still an active congregation. Several complaints had been filed over the years. Whispers of sexual abuse, strange nighttime gatherings, missing teens. But nothing ever stuck. The head pastor, Jeremiah Kane, died in 2019 of pancreatic cancer. His obituary read like that of a saint. But behind the pulpit, there were rumors. He had this thing about purifying the body through submission, Valerie said. No one could ever prove anything. But several girls, now women, have spoken out anonymously. All claimed they were drugged. All reported missing time. Some had scars. Others had implants removed from their bodies, shards of glass, nails, even a vertebra from a pig. But Elisa was the first with foreign human DNA inside her. She wasn't just another victim. She might have been the center of it all. Elisa began piecing the memories together like broken glass. The church, the oil, the way Pastor Kane had once placed his palm on her head and said, "She will carry what we cannot cleanse." At age 14, she had been dropped off at the church by a foster care agency after her latest placement failed. No one came looking. No one checked in. And in that basement, surrounded by chanting and candles, they made her into something she never chose to be. A vessel. A week later, the forensic report arrived. Among the new teeth found in the pouch, 2 matched open missing persons cases from 2004 and 2006. Another tooth belonged to an unidentified male with Mexican ancestry. But one tooth, small, cracked, yellowed, carried no living DNA because it belonged to Jeremiah Kane. They had buried him with full honors. But somehow, his molar had ended up sealed inside a pouch, inside a crate, inside a basement beneath a church he once ruled. You don't put a man's tooth in a ritual unless you're trying to keep him alive, Valerie said. Elisa looked down at her hands. They were shaking. "What did they put in me?" she asked, voice breaking. "And why?" The answer, Valerie knew, wasn't just in the church. It was in Elisa's own mind. And if they were going to stop whatever was happening, they'd have to go deeper. Inside her, Elisa Monroe had been violated in ways most people couldn't imagine. She didn't remember the pain. Not clearly, but her body did. It remembered every icy hand on her skin. Every night, she'd woken up drenched in sweat and not knowing why. It remembered being filled, not just with fear, not just with trauma, but with them. The 5 teeth had only been the beginning. Now, after weeks of investigations, crime scene discoveries, and whispers from women who'd been through the same church, Detective Valerie Watts believed something darker had happened. And Elisa? She had to find the answer inside herself. They began trauma therapy at a private recovery center in Augusta. Dr. Brenna Mahoney, a psychiatrist who specialized in ritual abuse survivors, agreed to take Elisa's case after seeing the teeth photos and the DNA results. "I've worked with cult victims," she said, "but I've never seen evidence so physical." Elisa met her in a room with soft gray walls and 0 religious symbols. Just neutral, comforting quiet. There were no candles, no hymns, no chanting. Dr. Mahoney used a method called progressive hypnotherapy, designed to unlock memories repressed through dissociation, a defense mechanism common in children exposed to repeated trauma. "Your brain buried these memories," she told Elisa, "but your body didn't forget. It never forgets. The first 2 sessions were slow. Elisa spoke in fragments. I remember oil on my stomach, a song, no melody, just syllables. They called me the gate. Then, during the 3rd session, it came, a memory that cracked the dam open. She was 15, kneeling in the basement, naked except for a sheer white robe. There were candles, dozens of them. Their flames flickered like they knew what was coming. Around her stood 6 men, faces painted in ash. One of them held a wooden box. The pastor, Jeremiah Kane, stood behind her, whispering in her ear, "You'll carry their voices, their wisdom, their guilt. You'll bear what they cannot confess." The box was opened. Inside, teeth, bloody, some with the roots still attached. Elisa shook her head. "No, receive them," Kane said. "Let their judgment enter you." Then pain, white-hot, searing, internal. Hands holding her down. The pressure of something being forced inside. Elisa screamed, in the memory and in the chair. She woke up sobbing, soaked in sweat, gasping like she'd come up from underwater. Dr. Mahoney sat beside her, calm but tense. "You were made into something," she said. "A living reliquary. A vessel." That night, Valerie got the call. She wasn't just a victim, the doctor told her. They turned her into a container. They believed that by placing body parts from these men into her, they could transfer sin, like a spiritual landfill, like a ritual purification machine. She absorbed it so they didn't have to. Detective Watts had heard her share of insane theories. But this was different, because there was physical evidence. Teeth, DNA, blood, and now memories. That made it real. She started digging into the financial records of the church and discovered something chilling. Over 2 decades, Faith River Revival Center had received more than $1.2 million in anonymous donations, all marked as private cleansing tithes. From businessmen, judges, politicians, men with secrets, men who may have killed, and men who needed someone else to carry the guilt for them. They'd paid the church. The church had chosen Elisa. More memories came, in waves, some unbearable. The red candles, the iron chair, the words chanted around her. 5 offerings, 5 burdens, 5 keys to silence the flesh. In one memory, Elisa saw herself vomiting after the ritual. A woman, maybe another victim, maybe a handler, gave her a spoonful of something dark and thick like molasses. "You did good," the woman said. "You took them inside. Now they'll sleep in you." And it slept. Until she turned 23. Until the pain started. Until her body rejected what it had held for too long. Elisa began drawing in her journal. The chair, the symbols, a face with no eyes. She wrote words that made no sense, syllables from dreams. Phrases like mouth without tongue and swallowed guilt. Dr. Mahoney told her that the drawings were important. They mean your mind is waking up. You're reclaiming your body. But Valerie wasn't so sure, because with each breakthrough, Elisa got sicker. Fevers, night sweats, vaginal bleeding. She was rushed to the ER twice. On the 2nd visit, doctors performed a minor exploratory procedure. They found bone fragments embedded in her cervix. Not teeth, not her own. They were from a femur, estimated to belong to an adult male, likely dead for over 5 years. "How did it even get there?" one doctor asked. No one had an answer, but Valerie did. "They kept putting parts in her," she said, until her body couldn't hold them anymore. By now, national media had picked up the story. The human reliquary. Teeth Girl of Georgia. Conspiracy theorists ran wild. Some said Elisa was the Antichrist. Others claimed she was the last remaining member of a long-lost cult that dated back to the Inquisition. Church officials denied everything. Faith River's few surviving elders went silent. But more women came forward. 7, then 11, then 23, each with scars, gaps in memory, or strange objects once removed from their bodies. One woman had a metal key inside her uterus. Another carried a gold molar for nearly 10 years. But Elisa? She was the only one with all 5 men's remains inside her. She wasn't just a vessel. She was the core, the chosen one, the one who had survived. But now the question was, for what purpose? Because whatever they made her into, it wasn't done yet. The human body was never meant to carry other people's sins. That's what Dr. Mahoney kept saying again and again, as if repetition could undo the truth that was slowly tearing Elisa Monroe apart from the inside. But Elisa already knew. She could feel it. Every time she closed her eyes, she didn't just dream. She remembered. She remembered the taste of candle wax, the metal of the chair against her spine, the moment they whispered her name like it was a prayer and a sentence all at once. And now, with every passing day, her body gave up more pieces of their twisted history. At the trauma unit in Savannah Memorial, a team of specialists convened for what they discreetly referred to as the vessel case. Elisa lay under anesthesia while surgeons worked to remove what scans had shown to be foreign materials embedded in her pelvic cavity. What they discovered turned a disturbing story into a national horror. First, they found a human knuckle bone, small, calcified, fused to scar tissue near her uterus. Then, a strip of fabric less than 2 inches long, soaked in what forensic analysts would later identify as a combination of semen, ash, and clove oil. Then, inside a fold of vaginal tissue, a rosary, not a plastic charm, but a full-sized stainless steel rosary with a crucifix bent in half. The lead surgeon, Dr. Angela Martins, walked out of the OR with her gloves still on and said only one word. Ow! They had to sedate Elisa for 36 hours afterward. The physical trauma was bad enough, but the emotional toll? Unquantifiable. Valerie Watts stood at the end of her hospital bed, arms crossed, mind racing. She had seen women trafficked, branded, sold. But this was a kind of ritual rape so calculated, so systemic, that it had become religion for the perpetrators. And somehow, Elisa had survived it. When she finally woke, Elisa didn't cry. She didn't scream. She simply asked, "How many?" Dr. Martins hesitated. "We found 12 objects so far. That includes the 5 teeth." 12, Elisa whispered, her eyes glassy. 12 apostles. What? She blinked hard. That's what they called it. The 12 wounds of the flesh. Each object was a wound. Each one let them in. Let who in, Elisa? "I don't know," she said. "But they're not done." The FBI took over the investigation that same week. Faith River was no longer just a failed church. It was the epicenter of what agents now called a multi-generational spiritual abuse ring. But when federal agents returned to the church basement, it had been torched. A fire had gutted the foundation, burned every beam. The chair, the crate, the symbols gone. Valerie stood in the ash, furious. "This wasn't random," she said. "Someone's cleaning up." Elisa, watching from the back seat of a black SUV, said something that made every agent freeze. "They're not cleaning up," she said. "They're starting over." The agents didn't believe her at first, until reports began coming in from Alabama, then Mississippi, then Louisiana. Young women found with missing time, unusual scarring, vague memories of ceremonies they were too afraid to describe. One woman, 19, adopted, was found wandering a field in Kentucky, unable to walk. Doctors discovered a disassembled wristwatch embedded in her vaginal canal. Its serial number traced back to a missing man from Georgia, the same Georgia county where Elisa had grown up. Elisa began drawing again. Images, she said, came from her dreams, or what she called the echo chamber. A house with no windows. A line of men with bleeding mouths. a child kneeling, blindfolded, while others watched from behind two-way glass. In one drawing, she scrawled, "They fed their guilt to the girl who wouldn't scream." Valerie looked at it for a long time. "Is that you?" Elisa nodded. "And are there more like you?" A pause. Then, there were 12. I was the 12th. The FBI combed through adoption records, foster home placements, and juvenile intake forms from 1995 to 2010. They found 11 girls who had all passed through the Faith River system. 6 were dead. Overdoses, suicides, accidents. 4 had vanished. No record after age 17. Only Elisa remained. The final one. The relic. Dr. Mahoney introduced a theory. The objects weren't just symbolic. They were part of a belief system where trauma physically transferred sin. These men believed they could remove guilt by embedding it into an innocent body. And the more they gave her, Valerie added, the more broken she became. Elisa overheard and shook her head. "No," she whispered. "I didn't break. I held it all." Later that night, she sat alone in her hospital bed, flipping through old photos of herself as a kid. Most she didn't remember. Some looked wrong. She zoomed in on one, taken in 2008. In the background of a church picnic, standing near the woods, was a man with a distinct scar across his lip. She remembered that face, but not from her childhood, from her dreams. She sent it to Valerie. The next day, facial recognition matched him to John L. Mercer, now 57, a pastor in rural Tennessee, and a known associate of Jeremiah Kane. Agents moved fast. They raided Mercer's church, New Soil Ministries, just outside Clarksville. What they found made Faith River look like Sunday school. There were new girls, 3 of them. One was 8 years old, and on the wall of the church basement, drawn in red, 12 vessels, 12 wounds, 1 salvation. Elisa watched the news coverage from her room. No expression, no tears, just quiet resolve. When Valerie visited the next morning, she said, "You were right. They weren't done." Elisa turned to her, eyes sharp. "They still aren't." By the time jury selection began, the media had already dubbed it the case of the living coffin. It was a headline that stuck, for good reason. The prosecution against John L. Mercer and 3 other high-ranking members of New Soil Ministries would become one of the most disturbing trials in American legal history. Not just because of the crime, but because of how many people tried to deny it had happened at all. Elisa Monroe had been living with human remains inside her body for over a decade. And somehow, to some people, that still wasn't enough. The courtroom in Nashville overflowed with reporters, activists, conspiracy theorists, and protesters on both sides. Some held signs that read, "Believe the victims. No God in that church. Elisa is a liar. Witch Trial 2.0. Behind bulletproof glass, Elisa sat beside her attorney in a gray suit, her hair pulled back, her hands folded in her lap. She looked calm, but inside, she was at war. The prosecution laid out its case in excruciating detail. 12 girls funneled through a religious rehabilitation system. 12 symbolic objects implanted into their bodies during cleansing rituals. Anonymous donations from wealthy clients, traced through shell charities, totaling $3.6 million. People raged, and some, quietly, remembered things they hadn't let themselves remember. 3 more women came forward within the next month. One in North Carolina, one in Arkansas, one from New Jersey who said, "I never told anyone because they said I'd go to hell if I spoke." Their stories weren't identical, but the symbols were the same. The silence was the same. The guilt that didn't belong to them, exactly the same. And now, because of Elisa, they weren't alone. Detective Valerie Watts retired 6 months after the trial. She moved to a small town in Montana and opened a bookstore. When asked by a local reporter what case she was most proud of, She didn't name the killer she'd caught or the traffickers she'd put away. She said, "There was a girl once who carried a graveyard inside her." That was all. She never spoke of Elisa again. As for John Mercer, he died in federal custody 2 years into his sentence. Heart failure. Some said he never spoke a word again after the trial. Others said he spent his final months chanting in Latin, scratching crosses into the walls of his cell, begging to be let back in. No one came to claim his body. No one came to his funeral. And somewhere, in a city where no one knows her name, Elisa Monroe walks among the living. She wears long sleeves even in the summer. She speaks rarely, but when she does, her voice doesn't shake. She still sketches. Sometimes she leaves her drawings in library books or church pews, quiet warnings with no signatures. And if you ask her why, she'll tell you, "Because I survived being a tomb, and now I plant warnings like seeds, so no one else has to rot in the dark." In the years that followed the trial, Elisa Monroe's name faded from the headlines. There were no book tours, no Netflix specials, no TED Talks, but her legacy? It whispered through the cracks of American consciousness like smoke that never fully cleared. It lingered, quiet, unsettling, unforgettable. Somewhere in Portland, Oregon, a high school health teacher began devoting 2 full weeks of curriculum to trauma education. Not just textbook trauma, but the kind no one wanted to talk about. She opened the unit with a simple sentence written on the whiteboard. "I wasn't just a victim. I was the evidence." In Memphis, Tennessee, a tattoo artist known for inking survivors offered a free design called The Gate, an abstract pattern inspired by a sketch Elisa had once drawn in a hospital bed. It looked like a door, half open, half sealed. Women came in with their sisters, some with their daughters. A few came alone. They didn't say much. They didn't have to. In Washington, D.C., buried on page 342 of a bipartisan justice reform bill, there's a clause called the Monroe Provision. It mandates surprise inspections and psychological oversight of all federally funded religious group homes. It also requires anonymous reporting hotlines monitored 24/7. It doesn't fix everything, but it has saved more than a few girls from becoming vessels. And every time a lobbyist tries to gut that funding, a staffer drops a thin file onto their desk. Inside is one photo, the X-ray of Elisa Monroe's pelvis. 5 foreign objects, 5 names, 5 crimes that no one could explain away. No one ever saw Elisa at the hearings. She never returned to Georgia. But if you asked those who'd worked the case, they'd tell you she didn't need to, because she had already become the haunting. Some said she moved to Canada. Others said she lived by the sea. One rumor claimed she was living in a mountain cabin under an assumed name, teaching poetry to kids. No one could confirm it. And the people who cared enough to try, they stopped looking, because they understood she had earned her silence. Every now and then, though, something strange happened. A church basement was investigated in Mississippi after a janitor found carvings on the wall, a spiral with 12 slashes around it. A psychiatric patient in upstate New York handed her therapist a drawing that matched Elisa's old sketch of the chair, even though she'd never seen the trial. And once, in Santa Fe, a social worker found a folded note tucked into the pages of a children's Bible in a group home. Asterisk, you're not what they put inside you. You are what survived it. Asterisk, some say it was Elisa. Others say it was someone like her. A girl who heard the warning and lived. There's no grave with Elisa's name. No statue. No plaque. But every so often, a stranger will walk past a library shelf or open a donated book and find a slip of paper inside, handwritten and signed. The messages vary. The body remembers. Nothing holy asks for silence. Asterisk, they've buried their guilt in me. I returned it like fire. Asterisk, no one ever sees who leaves them, but they always feel the same afterward. a mix of rage, sorrow, and something else. Resolve. Elisa Monroe never asked to be remembered, but she was, not with noise, not with fame, with echoes, because some legacies don't march. They haunt.